Hello, I want to welcome you all to our virtual coffee and conversation group here on the power of our story. We are a community where veterans, first responders, and all protectors can connect, share their experiences, and heal together. My name is Sarah Carell, founder of the Power of Our Story, and I'll be facilitating today's conversation. So today, I want to welcome our guest, David Berez, who is the grandson of Holocaust survivors, and Sabine Hofmann, who is the granddaughter of a World War II German soldier. So, what happens when these stories are finally spoken, and what becomes possible when they're shared together? So, how it'll work today is we'll first have David share his story, and then we'll have Sabine share. And then David will end the segment, and then we'll open it up for questions and conversation. So we're so happy that you're tuning in because we think this is just very important to talk about and how amazing it is to actually heal together. Um, a little bit about David Berez. He is a retired police officer and drug recognition expert. He is the author of A Resilient Life, A Cop's Journey in Pursuit of Purpose, a featured columnist, guest speaker, and panelist on a variety of public safety discussions. David earned his Master of Applied Positive Psychology, MAPP, from the University of Pennsylvania, the foundational program in positive psychology. Berez is the first and only police officer to be accepted into this program and hold this degree. He completed his education with a capstone project focusing on emotional regulation in law enforcement officers through the use of the humanities. He builds that storytelling through literature and visual art, he believes that storytelling through literature and visual art can increase the well-being of the individual, communities, and institutions. Berez is now a positive psychology practitioner who teaches the use of positive interventions to support individuals, communities, and institutions to go beyond surviving and start thriving. Now, a little bit about Sabine. Sabine is a third generation grandchild of a participant in the Second World War, part of the regular German Wehrmacht in the operational area of the former Soviet Union during the siege of Leningrad. She says, I know how difficult it is to work through and integrate the burden of what was experienced in the context of historical guilt. In that generation and the following generation, it was simply not possible. What happens instead is that the unresolved trauma, including the moral injury and destruction of the soul caused by involuntary participation in and witnessing of a profound war crime, is passed down through generations and manifests as unresolved grief, which also appears in psychosomatic illnesses. So I now just want to again thank our guests for doing this. I'm so thrilled to have you here. Really appreciate it. And David, I'm going to go ahead and now hand it over to you to start sharing your story.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah, and so grateful for the opportunity to be here. And I just think this is a really special opportunity and experience to bring in two sides of the same conversation. Generally speaking, when we present stories like this, it's usually one-sided. And to have the ability to look at this from two different angles, I think is really special, and grateful for you hosting that platform and recognizing that this was a thing and that we could do this and share it with others. And it's grateful to be here with Sabine to not only continue to learn from her, but to be able to build this bridge together. I think it's super important. So today, as Sarah mentioned, we're going to talk about what it's like to carry on through the lens of our ancestors. In psychology, it's called transgenerational trauma. There are some other names for it, but I think this is probably the most common. And I often look at things through the lens of when we're talking about stress and carrying stress, how that weight, how we carry that weight. And I like the visual of carrying these heavy bags, and we can label those bags different things. And as we go through time, they continue to build. So we'll get a little bit more into that as well. So just on this pictures up front here, we have just a soldier that represents Sabine's story and the victims of the Holocaust that represent my family and associated Jewish family stories from Germany. None of these are direct descendants of either one of us. They are just pictures that I picked from the internet, to be quite frank. Uh, let's see if we can just go in here. All right, there we go. So today's journey is these are some of the topics we're going to cover beyond our stories themselves. And so we'll hop right into it. So again, the idea of carrying bags as weight is, I think, a really important visual. And we build things from our childhood through our adolescence, young adults, and well into our senior years. And those bags get filled with different types of emotions, different types of experiences, positive and negative, and they get really heavy. But when we're a child, so many of the things we start out with were given to us not by our own choice, but by the people that came before us. And that's the transgenerational trauma. We don't choose to carry those bags, they're involuntarily given to us. But what we do with them is where we have control. How we process them is where we have control. And what we pass along then to our future generations is what we have control of. So it's really important to consider what we're given and what we're passing down. And I think there are ways, and we'll talk about some of those today, where we can lighten the load a little bit or even a lot of it. So when we do pass those bags down, they're not as heavy for the next generation. So for some additional context, we just I don't want to say celebrated is the right word, recognized Yom HaShoah, which is Holocaust Remembrance Day. That was last week. And just for some additional context on that, it's something that was established by the Israeli Knesset, which is their parliament, back in 1951 and then codified in 53. It is the date was appropriately chosen to coincide with Passover and Jews being saved from the biblical context and then the literal context from the Holocaust, and that same date was chosen for that holiday. And then it is remembered around the world in a variety of different ways. And grateful to have Barry here with us as well, who has been a big part of that in his corner of the world. So let's start with my grandmother's family and her story. She was born in a small town called Staudenheim. It was along the Nahe River in Germany, just like the rural suburbs of Frankfurt for your geography in your German geography. And she was about 17 years old in 1938 when the war started really to come to light. And in early months of that year, her family had received information from family that was already in the United States, cousins, that the war was really upticking and things were really bad. Nazis were taking over. There was rumors of executions. There was rumors of business seizures. And her family was warned that they should really find their way out of Germany at that time. So my grandmother had a sister 2 years younger, and her parents all lived together in this small house in Staudenheim, and they made plans to come to the U.S. via the USS Washington, which is pictured there on this slide. And they got word in the the early days of October of 1938, that there's a chance that that ship is not going to make it to Germany where they were supposed to board. And the likely last stop before it returns back to the US was going to be Le Havre, France. So they found an opportunity in a way to get to Le Havre, mostly by foot, and some other primitive types of transportation. So November 9th of 1938 comes around. The event, now known as Kristallnacht, which is literally translated into Crystal Night or Night of Broken Glass, when the Nazis came around and destroyed all the Jewish businesses and broken, the front windows, broken doors, windows on houses. And The reports are that about 92 Jews killed on that night, and about 20 to 30,000 rounded up and brought to the concentration camps. For some miraculous act of God, my grandmother and her family were not victimized in that way that night. And that next morning, they realized it was time to go. And they left. They left Staudenheim, Germany, and they made their way to Le Havre, France, and found the boat, the USS Washington, at that port. And they boarded that boat with their tickets from Germany. And they were told that they were very lucky to have randomly been in Le Havre, France to board the boat at that time, which they didn't know was random, because it was the last stop and it was not making its way to Germany because of Kristallnacht itself. And so they were able to then come to the United States. So I have all of these artifacts actually hanging in my house, which is where these pictures came from. It's my grandmother's naturalization papers and her parents' passports. Uh, I Whenever I have visitors here that in my house and I have to explain it, obviously the first thing they see is the swastikas on the passports, and they have to that needs to be explained. Obviously, why we have swastikas hanging in a Jewish household, but these were the stamps of the Third Reich at the time that they left Germany. So that's what those are there. Uh, my grandmother was an interesting person. She never felt ill will towards the country. She felt ill will towards the people that she felt betrayed her. And so that was her thing growing up. And she therefore was very protective of me and my relationships. She was just as instrumental in raising me as my mother was. So I was raised in that lens of fear, and therefore my youthful relationships were hindered by that, because she didn't want me to be betrayed by the people that I was getting close with in the same way that people that she was getting close with. So remembering that she was 17 when they left Germany, which was the end of her high school years, she had these friends for a lifetime, her schoolmates. And as the war kind of built up in 1938, she was demonized by these people that were her best friends for her whole life just because she was Jewish and that was the thing to do. So she didn't like me getting close to people and help and was active in not prohibiting, but becoming a barrier to some of my closer relationships because she was in fear that I would be hurt the way that she was hurt. So it was interesting to be raised under that lens and of lack of trust. And she never, when she came to this country, she obviously embraced the language. She found a job. She succeeded well, but she never embraced the idea of being an American. She always saw herself as a German first. And beyond all the betrayal, I think that to me to this day remains very interesting. And I think that's actually a good transition into my grandfather's story. So for my grandfather, he left in 1937 actually, and his brother had left the year before that in 1936. So my grandfather was, I think, 19 when he left Germany. His brother was a couple years older and had left in 1936 to come to the United States for college and then to be a dentist, which never happened. But he did go to college here. My grandfather left in 1937 when things started becoming a little bit untenable. The Nazi regime was taking over, and my grandparents, his parents, my great grandparents, would be like, we just want you to go make a good life in the United States, get your education, and then after the war is over, you can come back here and bring your education home with you. And we look forward to seeing you in a couple years. So that was late 1937. By mid 1938, about 6 to 8 months later, my great grandparents, his parents, were rounded up by a Nazi platoon and brought to Dachau concentration camp, where they remained for about 6 to 7 months, is our guess. And those letters you see there hanging on my office wall, those letters were sent from Dachau to my grandfather as the last letters that they ever wrote. And essentially, they were goodbye notes. And if you look up in the upper left-hand corner, you can see there's an examiner number there. That was a Nazi examiner from the camps that where those letters were sent from on the envelope in the upper left-hand corner. So those were their last letters. Those were their last words. And from the records we found many years later, they were probably killed about 2 days after those letters were written. They're very hard to see at this point. A lot of the ink has faded, but essentially it was explaining, how they were rounded up, brought to these concentration camps for manual labor, and but they were being treated well, which is the only way that they could get those letters out of the camps was to say stuff like that. But they essentially read as a goodbye note, and you can read right through some of the language. So that said, my grandfather grew up not ever knowing what ever happened to his parents. He just never heard from them again. And so many years later, we had found out, when and where they were killed. But he embraced this country as a savior as it was for him. And his patriotism was like none other. And I can certainly attribute my patriotism to him and everything that he has taught me along the way. He would always look through the lens of gratitude and optimism, where my grandmother looked through the lens of guilt and betrayal. And so watching those two dynamics, and I have the language for it now, and I noticed it as a young kid, but I didn't have the language to put to it. But having the language now, I look back on it, and it's a very interesting paradox that they grew old together with and shared with my mom, my sister, and I. So my grandfather was very patriotic. He's very optimistic about this country, believed that anybody that made it here could do anything that they put their mind and heart to. And I also believe that to be true and really grateful to have learned that from him. And when I graduated college was probably one of the highlights of his life, seeing his grandson living the American dream. And then when I decided to become a police officer, my grandmother was terrified and was really pissed off at me that that's something that I would chose to do because to her it represented the Nazis. And for my grandfather, he couldn't see a more patriotic duty than to putting on a uniform and serving others. And especially a uniform that had the American flag on the shoulder. To him, that was everything. So for him, every morning he woke up, the first thing he would do before pouring himself a cup of Sanka or Maxwell House, was to put the flag up on his porch. And every night, last thing he would do before brushing his teeth and going to bed was to take it in. So he was very proud of what this country had offered him and subsequently the family that he would create and the life he would build here. And we're going to get a little bit deeper into the difference between grief and pride and shame and how that kind of all ties together after Sabine tells her portion of the story as well. So that's my grandfather. He raised me with a lens of optimism, while my grandmother, who I love dearly, and this is not a negative thing on her, raised me through a lens of continuous fear. So I think that paradox is very interesting when they both came from very similar backgrounds and opportunities to be here. So interestingly, my grandmother and grandfather are cousins. Please don't judge. And that's why I'm also maybe a little weird. I don't know. But my grandmother's family had a hotel in Sanktwashausen along the Rhine River, and that was eventually taken over by the Nazis and used as a central Germany headquarters. Uh, and my grandfather's family was in the wine business, and as a young kid, he would deliver wine to the hotel, and that's how they originally met when they were little. And then they were cousins by marriage, so I guess it's not too awkward. And then they somehow connected here in the Lower East Side many years later when they both came to the country, Lower East Side of Manhattan, and fell in love and got married and built their family. So their ties go back quite far. I've been very fortunate to go back and see both of their home turf, both Nachenheim, where my grandfather grew up, and Stoutenheim, where my grandmother grew up. And I can see where they developed their optimism and their guilt or their shame from. having gone back to their hometowns. When we went back to Staudenheim, where my grandmother grew up, every time we walked down the street, people would shutter their windows and they would peek out of little holes to see the Jews walking down the street. And this was in 1988. So it was very interesting to watch the shame of the people that were still there that probably knew who my grandmother was from many years earlier, and seeing us return that she was still alive and whatever else. So the feelings there were not warm and fuzzy. When we went to my grandfather's town of Nackenheim, we were greeted with open arms, with this level of "I'm so glad to see you again after 50 years." And it was such a weird, I'll use the word again, paradox of experiences between what grief and shame look like in one community, and pride and optimism and gratitude looks like in another. So having that dynamic between the two was very interesting. And growing up, I could then see that in both of my grandparents, the same dynamics, which is pretty wild. So that is the general story. I think, as I like to do, is put a little bit of science and understanding behind some of this. So when I grew up, with those through those two different lenses, I often felt a little bit isolated. I felt a little vulnerable, unrelatable, because the kids that I was in school with didn't have those stories and didn't have those backgrounds. And it was also stuff we didn't really talk about. In history class in high school, we learned a little bit about the Holocaust, but if anybody remembers their, 10th and 11th grade U.S. history, you don't always get that far in the book. And, now they do because history starts later as we all get a little older. But back then, it wasn't really that much history. So we're talking about, the mid to late 80s into the early 90s. The war was only 40 years before that. So it's just not that long ago. So we never really got up to that point. So it was something that I had that was unique to me, that I really didn't get a chance to talk about, but made me feel different. It definitely gave me a lens on life that wasn't always positive. So as I looked in some of this research more recently, there is a 300% overrepresentation of Holocaust grandchildren in psychiatric referrals. This is a Canadian study. And so this goes right back to the transgenerational trauma of stories we never told that people carry with them and don't know what to do with. So I found it fascinating to learn that in this particular region of Canada, it was the eastern region of Canada in the Toronto area, where there was a 300% overrepresentation of Holocaust grandchildren. Crazy when you're talking about therapy referrals. And then fast forwarding to 2016, there's a great study on the epigenetics of the transformation of that stress, what that looks like in the second or third generation, depending how you look at it, and where they're finding that the stress and trauma that develops in these younger people is not theirs. It's two or three generations before, and they're carrying it biologically with them, even if they don't know the stories themselves, which is pretty crazy. So the quote here on the bottom: "You did not earn these bags, but you didn't, and you did not unpack them, but they are yours. You're carrying them, and now it's your time to deal with them, so you don't pass them on to the next person." So, by trauma is biologically inherited through epigenetics. It's a really important thing to understand because we're not just talking about Holocaust survivors. We're talking about first responders, police officers, veterans. When you do not share and process your journeys, you are passing it along to other folks that will then need to do it for you later on in their lives. So give them the future gift of doing it yourself and not passing your stuff onto the next generation or the one that follows them. Because if we don't unpack it, as we're going to learn from Sabine, 3 generations later, they're still dealing with the shame and the grief that's associated with it. So it does cut the other way, though, which is really important to understand. If we do process our own journeys and our own traumas and our own dramas, uh, we also pass on those coping skills epigenetically to the future generations. So if we have learned how to process and deal with things effectively, not only are we not passing on the bad stuff, in reverse, we're actually passing on the good stuff. So it's very important to consider that. And the bottom line here, yes, the bags are heavy. However, they don't have to break you, even if we even when we do feel their weight, because we'll know how to deal with the stuff. And as we add the stuff into those bags, we'll know how to process it. So not only does it continue to weigh us down, we're not also passing it along. And the opposite of that is the weight of the silence. And that's where we're going to hear more about Sabine's journey. The silence is deadly, and it will definitely destroy you and your family. And I like the way that Brene Brown talks about this. And there is guilt that's associated with our transgenerational trauma. And that's a feeling that I did something bad. But the shame is the belief that I did something bad. And I think they're very different, and we need to understand those. We can feel guilty about things that came before us that we didn't have any control over. We can feel bad about that, but we don't have any control over it. And we should not think that we're bad because of it. And I think that's a struggle. And I look forward to hearing Sabine's take on this, that I think that's a struggle that Germans in Germany has had. And that's the dichotomy that I saw when we went back in 1988. There was a community, my grandma's community, that felt like they did something bad. And maybe they did, and we don't know who those people are at this point, but maybe they did do something bad, but they certainly felt like they did, and they felt like they were bad people as a result of the actions that their country took. Rather, where my grandfather's community, they felt like something bad happened, but they knew it wasn't them. So they felt guilty, but they didn't feel the shame, and that's why they were open and welcoming. And I thought the way Brene Brown puts this, it really puts good language to that experience that we've had over the years. So with that, I would like to turn this over to Sabine, where she can talk about her family's experience and how that has affected her several generations later. I do have Sabine's slides incorporated into mine, so you'll hear her just telling me to move on with my slides, with the slides, I should say.
Yes, thanks a lot, David. You described it so very well. What is the dilemma in German families after the war? And this illustrates this slide illustrates it very, very good. Yes, first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to all of you, especially to Sarah, because Sarah encouraged me to share my story. And all the storytellers and facilitators here encouraged me as well. And for this, I'm very grateful. And now, yes, I would like to start with that, what has the most heaviest input on my family. And this is very complicated. And I think David said it, grieving and integrating the wounds of war is different in Germany. And I can illustrate that for you with two pictures. Would you put the next slide? Thanks. Yeah, I choose two pictures here to show you what I mean. I think I choose them really. It's a really interesting choose because Operation Overlord was the Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6 in 1944, and this invasion changed the war and leads to the end of the Nazi regime in Europe. And you have here two perspectives. You see on the one side, young soldiers sitting in the landing boat on their way to Omaha Beach. And on the other side, you see some German soldiers, all 18, 19 years old, supposed to be, in their bunkers with an artillery or machine gun. And yeah, what happens, we know. When the young soldiers in the landing boats landed on the beach, the machine gun fire will start immediately, and most of them felt in the first time. Of course, later on, the other side, the German soldiers fell as well, because the fighters from the Allies managed that. And so we can see we have here two perspectives, and I think this is very important when you reflect the question about how we process as Germans our grief. We must ask some more deeper questions. And I think the first question is, what are we fighting for? Or what were German soldiers fighting for? And here we have the biggest contrast, I think, because when you see the young soldiers in the landing boat, you know, they fighting for humanity, and they fighting for freedom, they fighting for human rights, and for all this stuff we didn't have in Germany during the Nazi era. The Germans, on the other side, for what did they fight? I think that's a completely contrary. They fight for racism, completely racism policy. They exploitation of whole people in the East, especially Jews. Then forced labor, euthanasia, and sterilization, forced labor, and slavery. And this is really, really, really a big difference when you realize later on for what you were fighting for. And this is the main question, I think, when you do remembering. What do you remember? For what did your ancestors fight, and what does it do to you in your collective memory, the collective memory of your people, when you realize that you suddenly stay on the wrong side of the history and were seen as one of the most evilest persons in life, in humankind. And this is, I think, the main question we should talk about. And this is why integrating grief and integrating the wounds of war is so difficult in Germany. Next slide, please. Yes, and it has definitely an impact on the most important question: how do we raise children in Germany after the war, or during the war, of course? What does it mean? I think this is the main question, the main crucial question that had to be answered in families. That was the question: what do we have to pass down to the generation, to the next generation? And this is really hard test because of what happened. The answer was nothing. And this is what David pointed out: silence. This is the most dangerous thing in history, the most dangerous thing when we be quiet about our history and about that, what we did in history. Yes, and on the other side, we have, when we go back to the alleys, we see rituals, we see folded flags, we see stars and badges and heroic stories around the World War II. And this is, of course, it is true. And I think on our side, there's nothing we could to be proud of, because that what happened was so inhuman, and destroying was so great in Europe. And of course, it was true. Germany was the people, the Germans were the people who started that. Okay. Yes, and this is why I want to hand over to that, what happened in my family and what I recognize now as the most devastating event that happens on the one side, on the historical side, of course, and also the influence of this event of my family of origin. And this is historical event, the siege of Leningrad. It is not so much known as the other fights in Russia, for example, Stalingrad. There's this very common, and people know about Stalingrad, but very few know about Leningrad. And the problem is that because I think it's of the Russian archives that they were opened very late, and so it was less known in Germany about that. So what was it? It was the most destructive siege in history, and possibly the most deadly, because there were estimated 1.5 million deaths from the pre-war population of 3.5 million. And it lasts over 872 days. And this is really a large number of days and nights. And the goal was to starve the city and then after level it to the ground, because Hitler was afraid of a costly house-to-house fight, and he wants to avoid that the soldiers die there. And so the idea was we besiege the city and wait until everyone is going to die there. And this is the story. And my questions were, what might my grandfather have felt seeing, hearing, smelling, or tasting this incomprehensible horror unfolding in immediate proximity, because he was part of the army group who encircled Leningrad. And as I said, he was there all the days and nights. Yes, and this is what I did not have in my conscious brain, but in my subconscious brain, and I felt that there is something very heavy in my family. But no one wants to talk with me about that. It was a kind of rule, don't ask, he won't tell. He's not able to talk about that because my father was so engaged, I think, in love with my grandfather, that he could not uh, even understand what happened. My father himself was 5 years old when grandfather was drafted into the Wehrmacht. And he did not understand as a 5-year-old boy what happened. And no one explained him. Grandfather disappeared. And then when you see him, it was after the war, he was a broken person, a deeply broken person in heart and soul, and also aggressive. It changed into a person with a completely character that he didn't know and experience before. He could not make sense of that. And nobody explained it to him, of course. And so this remained the hardest break in our family, that first there was a lovable person, my grandfather, and then after the war, he changed into a kind of monster. And no one could make sense of that, especially not my father. And this is the break and the crack in the core values of our family, because there happens something like this, what we call moral injury. Then it is because when you see and sense and perceive what happens in front of you in your direct Umgebung, I don't know the English word, you get a perception in your brain, you sense that, and it's a kind of survival mode, that when you sense something dangerous, you want to flee, or to fight against that. But this was not possible, of course. And so when you have to endure 872 days and nights in such a situation, that must change something in his brain, I suppose. And I think that is part of the story. Umgebung is area. Thanks a lot, Miriam. So, okay. Yes, this was what I want to tell about this. And this was not the only war crime the Nazis committed, of course. And I want to hand over to the liberation of Auschwitz concentration camp. It was just 1 year later, on the same date like the liberation of Leningrad. It was the 27th of January 1944 is what Leningrad, and 1945 it was Auschwitz. And this was nearly the same numbers of deaths, 1.5 million. In Auschwitz, we had nearly all Jews, and in Leningrad, it was a civilian population. And later on, it was declared as genocide as well, because of the goal the Nazis said it did not happen by accident. It was an estimated goal the Nazis want to reach. So, and this, I think, is shows us how evil the mindset and the politics of the Nazis were, and what does it do for me, for example, and my family of origin. What does it mean when my grandfather was part of it? Maybe not an so active, but a more passive part, but he has also duties, of course, in this Sears ring. And yes, and this is what I have to process. And but to this, until to this time, I could not make sense of that, because no one told that or explained it to me and my family. There was a kind of legacy of silence. This changed when I go to university. Can put the next slide. When I met Professor Dr. Dan Baron from the Ben Gurion University of the Negev. He came to Germany in the beginning of the 90s, and his project was to interview children of the perpetrators, because he is a survivor of the Shoah as well. He is born in 1938 in Haifa, and his parents is in the same way like David Berez had one of the last ships that went out from Nazi Germany. And they went from Hamburg. The parents were born in Hamburg. So, and Dan Baron became a psychologist, and he conducted interviews with the Shoah survivors. His aim was to understand their feelings, and of course what passed they down to the next generation and the next generation. This was his research project. And he thought after a while, that's not enough. I want to hear the other side as well. And that is why he came to Wuppertal in the beginning of the 90s. And there I was one of the students who had the opportunity to take part in these programs. Okay, can we slide over the next slide? Yes, the encounters were deeply moving. Here you can see a portrait of Dan, and on the right side you can see the Wannsee Villa located in Berlin. And the Wannsee Conference Villa was, of course, the house where they planned the final solution. Today it's a memorial site of a remembrance site, and where you can learn a lot about the Shoah and, of course, of the planning of the final solution. And we had seminars in the Wannsee Villa as well. And we were together with the TRT group. The TRT group is the Trust and Reflect, to Reflect and Trust group. That was the first group Dan founded, with second generation members of Nazi perpetrators. And there happens a very remarkable situation. I would like to tell about this because that hits a very deep point. In this group, there was the son of Martin Bormann. And Martin Bormann was one of the highest ranked Nazis in the Reich. And the firstborn son, Martin Bormann, it's the same name, Martin Bormann Jr., was part of this group. And now when we entered that villa, something deeply moving happens. in the villa, in the main entrance, you find all the portraits of the Nazis who were involved in planning the final solution. And this was, of course, Martin Bormann's father. It was Martin Bormann himself. And it was a portrait, and Martin Bormann Jr. stand in front of that portrait, and he was completely silent. And that was very, very moving, because Dan asked him silently, what do you feel? What do you feel here? In this historical site, you see your father, and he looks like you. Indeed, he looks like the same person. And what do you feel? And I think that's a very important question, because the last time Martin saw his father was in the Führerbunker in 1945. And Martin Bormann, father of the father, flew, and he was missing, and no one knows where he was, and he was suspected to go to South America. But indeed, he committed suicide. Later, few days later, he flew from the bunker. But this is what was unknown for a very long time. But Martin Bormann Jr., he said he had deeply panicked about his father, because Martin Bormann Jr. became later on a Catholic priest. And he said, when my father would find out that I became a Catholic priest, he would not know what his father would do with them. And this shows the one side of the father as a cruel Nazi ideologist. And on the other side, Martin Bormann Jr. said, I loved him because he was my father. And that was both sides who are incredibly heavy. They are not. He was not able to integrate that, and I think this describes a very important moment, also in the reflection we have in the group after, because Dan asked us, so what is it? What is this evil thing in us? And why is the father so different from the son? And what is the how can we distinguish that? What makes the one person to a mass murderer, a mass killer, and the other to a Catholic priest? What's the difference, and what must happen, and what is the reason for that? And so this suddenly becomes very, very personal to us, because we feel no one could be safe. Maybe we don't know what we will do when the circumstances will change. And this is what was one of the deepest experiences, that we could not distinguish that. Later on, Dan, that was a kind of experiment, Dan showed us some slides and asked us the question, what was an experiment, the how can we identify a Nazi? And this was, he showed us portraits from persons. And we should say, is this a Nazi, or is this a Nazi, or is this a Nazi? And what do you think was the result? Yeah, I think, we can't make a distinction. This is a Nazi, or this is not a one, by their faces, for example. Even Joseph Mengele looks like a very sympathetic person, or Otto Ohlendorf, for example, looks like very supportive, high-educated person, but was a mass murderer. And this is what was one of the very deep experience we made there in the Wannsee Villa. We had no mean to distinguish between normal people and Nazi people. And we have it in our hands to what we become. And I think this is a very important experience. Yeah, can we see next slide? Yes, when I draw a conclusion, from these experiences we made there with the encounter groups, I would put it so together. First is the witnessing, because we have to witness what is also inside us, not also not of course in the others, but also inside us. And it is a process of sharing the experiences of the wound. And the challenge is about to find an identity between the perpetrator side and the individual suffering, and is also about the balance to balance the narrow path between recognizing the wounds of the others and also discovering one's own wound. And that is very important. You have to endure this, yeah. And this happens with witnessing with strong people by your side. And strong people like Dan Baron was such a person. Then the next step is you have to recognize that you have a wound, and it's very important not to judge that or to categorize it or to compartmentalize it. It's just a wound, a deep wound, and it's not about absolution or forgiveness at all, because the wound stands on for its own, and you have to realize that and to acknowledge that. That is the most important thing. And finally, this is what we learned from Ryan Roberts, the role of an elder. An elder is a person who is very experienced. It could be a therapist, or it could be a person who had similar experiences but worked through experiences like this. And the elder is the witness. And it is not a kind of enmeshment or displacement. It's about that the elder helps you to recognize and to guide you through this. And this is, I think, the most important thing when we talk about integration. And this is, I think I learned then in the seminars, and I must say that also in this format here as well, because we have different people here, we have different kind of stories, and the stories are in the deep core all the same, because the stories deal about trauma and integration, and therefore we need persons who were experienced with that. Psychologists, of course, and also experienced persons who went through this, and without judgment. And this is why I'm so grateful for this format, and why I'm so willing to share my story here. Yeah, to conclude that, it is fear and hope, it is both together. And I want to show you what it means for me to be a German today. And this is, first of all, of course, remembrance and responsibility. Symbol is the Wannsee Villa, a very important place for me. And then it is art and science. I believe in science, of course, because I studied chemics. And why I say that and why I point this out, science, we live in an age of conspiracy theories, and conspiracy theories and racism is, for example, also such kind of stuff that leads into fascism. And this is very important for me to put something against this. Science on the one side, and art, expression, express yourself, is the other side of that. And I suppose with those tools, I hope I'm a little bit more safe. And maybe you ask why I maybe have left a photograph. Yeah, maybe this is for you, that maybe you can add something, what it means to be a German, or maybe what it means to belong to a people that has a heavy burden. Yes, and with that, I would close my introduction.
Thank you, Sabine. That was absolutely powerful and beautifully shared. And so grateful to be sharing this platform with you because I think combining the two perspectives is so important for everybody to hear. And I have a whole list of questions for when we're all done with this. But in the interim, uh, we'll close out. We'll just talk a little bit more about some of the theory about these conversations and putting some language to certain things. And I don't think we can have a discussion about the Holocaust without somehow including Viktor Frankl. Such a powerful storyteller, psychologist, and optimist that I think when we look at this period of time through any lens, especially through one of transgenerational trauma, it's so important to look at his work and infuse it some way. So he says we cannot avoid suffering, but we can choose how to cope with it and finding meaning in it and move forward with renewed purpose. That is from his book Man's Search for Meaning, which is his primary work. Which, if you don't know the history of that, he actually wrote it or began writing it prior to his capture and imprisonment. He finished writing it while in the concentration camp, and it was unfortunately stolen and burned just before his release. And he then rewrote it upon his release, and it was then republished again in 2006. Incredible human being. So all of his notes and everything were destroyed, and he did recreate so much of it. So he came up with this idea of logotherapy, which is meaning in life is found through creative work, loving relationships, and an attitude we take towards unavoidable suffering. And that's what he's probably known best for. And for me, it's a selfish plug to my own theory on courageous optimism. I think that he defines that. And understanding how Sabine looking at her family, me looking at my family, how we can move forward in an active and disciplined way to pursue meaning, despite the circumstances that argue against it. So I think understanding how we move forward from the unavoidable suffering that was given to us that we didn't ask for, but now we're using ways to use it for good. So uh, storytelling has, and I think this is kind of where we're going to make this come full circle for Sarah. Storytelling is the exit ramp from shame. So the shame that my grandmother had felt, the shame that maybe Sabine's family has dealt with over the years, I think the process of storytelling is the antidote to that. And I think it's really important that we consider what we're doing here today and how that kind of moves the ball forward. Um, Shame lives in silence, and storytelling is the light that then turns it on. So I don't believe that where we are with this process is resilience. We're not just bouncing back. I'm looking at this through the lens of anti-fragility, which means how do we move forward better from the adversities that we were faced and or that we have faced. And for me, I don't look at it as my adversities. It's the adversities of the transgenerational trauma. My grandparents had the adversities. I'm now dealing with them because they certainly didn't. But it's their adversity that we're looking to grow from. And how do we use it for good? Not what happened, not why did this happen to us, but why did this happen for us? And here the quote at the bottom, the goal isn't to put the bags down, it's to unpack them and carry them forward only what still has meaning. So let's get rid of the stuff that no longer is part of the story that we need to pull forward, doesn't have as much meaning, and only take forward the positive thoughts and how we can use them for good. So I alluded to it before. Pride is the counterpoint to shame, and I think, and I'm not going to speak for Sabine, but for me, the ability to tell and share this story is the pride. And I think that if my grandmother and even my grandfather to some extent was able to find words to put to their journeys, which is not something that they did back then, that whatever shame and guilt they did have, the pride of their journey and being able to share it with others would certainly be that antidote. And I think that's something we need to consider no matter what our journeys look like, whether they're law enforcement or first responder journeys that have given us these feelings that maybe we don't appreciate or don't want. finding ways to share them will certainly eliminate the shame and hopefully turn that shame into pride. And again, the quote here on the bottom, pain is not the absence, sorry, pride is not the absence of pain. It's the decision that the pain will not have the last word. I really love that one. So to wrap it all up and close it up, we all carry these bags. We need to open them and we need to make them lighter because we don't want the transgenerational trauma that has affected us to be further passed down. We want the meaning and the stories and the lessons, but not the stress and the trauma that comes with it. So, as we often say regarding the Holocaust, never again. But that doesn't mean never forget. It just means never stop growing and learning from it. So we live in a time now where I think there's more anti-Semitism than I ever remember in my entire life. Uh, and I don't know what it's like in other parts of the world, but here in this country, I think that we have forgotten to some extent. And I think it's really important that we have these conversations because is not that long ago. This is our grandparents we're talking about. We're not talking about, ancestral history here. So thank you guys for being here, for listening. For those that are listening on the recording of future dates, thank you for taking the time to share, to listen to the stories that we shared. And I hope that you share this with others because we cannot ever forget and we can never stop growing from it. So with that, I would like to pass it back to Sarah and who can facilitate the questions. I also should, just for academic purposes, show you that we have a reference list for all the things that were mentioned here as well, and happy to share those with you at some other point if you're interested. Thank you, Sarah, and passing it back to you.
Oh my gosh, I don't know about the rest of you, but I feel like I need time to like chew on this. This was really so well shared, so deeply shared. It touched my heart so much, just the grief, just the it's beyond understanding, and then it's amazing how if we can just keep this conversation going to never forget what that can do to teach us going forward, right? I mean, just there's so many things that hit me. I'm going to buy you guys some time on this talk because I know that you're processing right now. So I'm going to buy you a little time and I'll just go to my notes real quick and just share some things. I was imagining, David, when you were sharing about your grandmother and your grandfather, the different experience they had when they returned. It's like everything that you were sharing, I was just imagining what it was like to be them. Like
So
it just,
I can shed a little light on that actually, and you can probably picture it. So I'll never forget when we went back to my grandmother's elementary school, and well, I shouldn't say elementary school. It was a compound of schools that was all grades, and there was. She always described when I was growing up this tree in the courtyard where they used to play. And so if you can picture, a 10-year-old tree that when she was there, size of a standard pear tree or whatever, and she comes back 40 years later and she stands under this now almost 100-year-old tree with her back up against the tree, just like she did on the playground when she was 12 or 13, with her foot up onto the tree and just leaning and looking around, feeling disconnected from the people that were there, but reliving the moment in the moment. And I remember, like, I could just get teared up thinking about it. I remember standing back and watching her, and my mom put her arm around me as we stood and watched my grandmother process a lifetime of childhood memories at the age of, 60 or whatever she was at the time. And it was fascinating to watch her as an adult under this adult tree, looking like a child leaning up against a young tree. It was fascinating.
wow.
That's like my biggest memory from that trip. Crazy. So she saw all the kids running around that courtyard. She heard the words, she felt the feelings all over again. And watching her absorb that was fascinating.
Wow. Yeah, I can't imagine. Just it's imagining all that happening when you yourself in your own life don't have any kind of context for everything that she has been through. And oof. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And then Sabine, I just want to acknowledge too, I think what hit me on your side too, I mean, just so much on both of your sides. I definitely I want to let Scott in here and start the conversation going, but I think what really oof, so good. Hard to oof, not it's hard to not get emotional, but I just imagine young men and women wanting to serve their country and not really having a full understanding of what they're fighting for. And
Hmm.
then to do horrific things and then have to deal with all that after. And just kind of what your dad went through, like seeing this, human that he loved, who was loving. Sorry. May have to edit this out, but and just, trying as a little boy to try to understand what happened and to not understand what loyalty means. Like here he is, a 5-year-old still feeling loyal to his father. So anyway, I'm just imagining again being all these people in both of your stories. And so I just feel very grateful. I think this could be just a very, very powerful conversation where we can really come together and understand the human part of such a horrific thing in our world history. So, thank you so much for both of you being willing to do this, being part of the solution, the courageous optimism, and what can happen through this very, very tough topic. And so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Scott now. Scott, what's on your, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you again for this platform, Sarah. Hats off to the Power of Our Story for bringing together the right people. And that has absolutely happened again today. I'm sorry that I'm not, at home able to watch this today. Something came up and I'm on the road, so I don't have notes. So I'm just going to pull from my memory banks here of what was discussed. But I also want to thank David and Sabine for the courage to share their stories because these are tough stories, and you guys both did it so well. Uh, I know for me, I would have a hard time uh, not shedding a few tears, and I'm glad my camera's off because it might happen here again while I'm driving. But forgiveness is such a powerful thing, and war is abject hell. And it extends beyond the battlefield. And just like you guys talked about, it is transgenerational in many ways, in many forms. And we've heard now since the end of the war just how bad the Nazis were, just how horrible it was for the Jewish people. And that has been really, that drum has been beaten for the longest time. And I think David is absolutely right. It's starting to change a bit. Uh, it comes down to politics and ideologies. And Sarah, you mentioned when you were commenting here a minute ago about how it must have been for these young men who were brainwashed. I mean, they were absolutely brainwashed. No one in their right mind would just hop right into that. Are there sick people that do sick things? Yes, because they're not right in the head. But when you take an entire generation of young people and you indoctrinate them like the Nazis indoctrinated their population, that's how things happen. And I think if people are going to be honest, they can see some of that happening now. I'm not going to equate it to that because there aren't people in concentration camps, but you can see a genesis. You can see a baseline
Yep.
that is forming, and it is unconscionable. And we must stand up and say no, because we know what truth looks like. We know it when we hear it, And we need to remember that. And we need to be the ones to say, not again, right? And mean it and do something about it and not watch your neighbor go away.
Yep.
You know, we've heard that, right? First they came for this person, then they came for that person. And then there was no one left when they came for me, right? It happened. And thank God that we have the ability to sit back with perspective and see what happened. And then what I find so graceful is that we're able to listen to Sabine and we can empathize with her, with what her father went through, what her grandfather experienced in the war, and that this has just been tucked away. A whole couple of generations have had to deal with this. You know, I think we talked about this once before. If you look at American history and you go into the Civil War, how that very it's similar, right? The folks that lived in the South, not everybody was a slave owner, and a lot of these people were fighting because they lived in the South. They were fighting for their homes. You know, it's you can break it down to that base level, and when you look at the shame that comes with that, and there's a lot. I mean, it's a different thing, right? But people still died. It was wrong, and thank God the right folks won in both instances. And that's why I'm saying that we need to remember that that's the case. We understand truth, and we have to be willing to say and do in truth. And that's what both of you guys are doing. And thank God for you two and for being here today.
Thank you for that, Scott. I wanted to just quickly add, both Sarah and Scott, I have literally the same notes that you both just talked about in my own notes. So clearly that's a resonating theme amongst our group here. And for me, I guess this goes to Scott's point of forgiveness. I don't want to believe that all these soldiers were bad, just like in Brene Brown's phrasing of that. And yes, there are evil and there were evil people, but I can't in my heart believe that all of them were truly anti-Semitic. They were just following orders and doing things that they were told to do. And so many of our veterans, so many of our active military, so many of our law enforcement folks are doing just that. And they're following the laws of the land and being instructed to do things that may go against their own morality. But then I think we have to then take a step back and say, is this for us or is this not for us? I don't know they had that option during World War II. I think they were probably, if they didn't go along, they would have been killed themselves. But what I also find fascinating, and this goes then back to Sabine's part of the presentation, is it doesn't seem like any of that perceived or real anti-Semitism was then passed down in a way that was ideologically prolific throughout the German community because it resulted in guilt and shame. So if they were truly anti-Semitic as a culture, I don't think you would have that. And so it's interesting to me that it was single generational, and that's why it leads me to believe that it was also maybe not voluntary uh, in their actions. Now, it doesn't excuse the actions, but it may explain some of them. So I find that to be fascinatingly interesting that the ideology was not passed down. And I'm hoping that's where we're at today in this country, that we're at a linear space in our wackadoo ideology with certain people, and that it's temporary and won't be passed down, and hopefully just nipped where leave it where it belongs in the course of history books.
Mm.
Hey, David, if I can just say one more thing, I'm absolutely in line with what you're saying, and from the forgiveness perspective and that standpoint, I think God puts in our DNA the ability to understand the difference between right and wrong. I think that is absolutely within every person. And as you grow and mature as a child and become an adult, how do you forgive if you don't? Certainly, God can help us with that. But as a person who might not know God, how does one forgive? I think they have to be informed, right? They
I
have to
agree.
have the other side and see, and to try to be as objective as they can.
Yeah.
It's like when in the military, if you're a commander and you have to pass judgment on a service member because they've done something wrong and you have that authority, you just don't look at it and say you're guilty, boom. You have to understand what happened and you listen to that person's story so that you can make an informed decision and
Yeah.
do the right thing. And I think it's so important that you guys were able to talk through these things. And because I can guarantee you there are people that don't know these things because it's not being taught like it used to be taught. And I'll just say one last thing. What my last tour, I was a battalion commander in the Marine Corps, and we had reservists that were doing training. And there was a young gal, and I don't fault her. She was a young Marine. She was giving a little bit of professional military education on the Holocaust. I don't know where she got her information from, but it was all very, very thin. And I was actually surprised. And at the end, I stepped in. I said, "Look, we're going to extend this by about 10 minutes because there was a lot of things that needed to be said." And six, 6 million people were exterminated, and that wasn't even talked about. I asked the young, and these were all young Marines. They were like between 18 and probably 22. When I asked how many Jews were killed in the Second World War, no one knew. No one raised their hand, and the guesses were, you know, they had no clue. That scares me.
So what
And
I think is really important
that
to
was
add to
in
that,
that was in
Scott,
two, that was 2012. So
yeah,
that's been a few years.
I think what's important to add to that is yes, there were 6 million Jews, but there's also 6 million others, and they don't get talked about at all. So
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah, and yeah, I hate to be the selfish Jew on the on the Zoom, but yeah, it wasn't just us. It was 12 million total, and that never gets discussed. So at least that they knew Jews were killed, I think, is great. I The fact that they didn't know that there was others, I think, is challenging as well.
Thank you so much for that, Scott. I appreciate the addition. And Rich, what is on your mind?
First of all, I'd like to thank David and Sabine, and I'm going to do as much as I can to get this to share this because this is powerful. This is very powerful. David, you said something earlier about the soldiers, and you're absolutely right. The Nazi hierarchy had to change their extermination methods because of the effect that it was having on some of the soldiers. So they had to go to different methods because it was affecting people psychologically.
Hmm.
Uh, we talk about history now. On the street that I grew up on in New Jersey uh, was primarily there was maybe 3 or 4 black families, which of course I was one of, and the rest were primarily Jewish and a few Italians and maybe a couple Polish families. But the amazing thing was that when I was in school, they didn't talk about the Holocaust in history, right? And and I think I had mentioned this to you once before. It wasn't until years later that it hit me that I grew up next door to Holocaust survivors and had no idea. I mean, you on the Sabbath, you would see the Jewish people walking on their way to the synagogue, and I'd ask my mom. I said, "Mom, what's that?" And she said, "There's are the Jewish people going to church." And had no idea that I was surrounded by Holocaust survivors. Uh, Also, in the 60s, as I told you once before, the the police department, we had to stand guard during the high holidays at the Jewish synagogue, and the one that I was at was a pretty big one. Uh, First time I went there and stood guard duty. Uh, when the service started, they invited me inside. They gave me a yarmulke. I had a shawl. They gave me a prayer book, and every every year they would ask for me to come back and be their person. About 5 years ago, I reached out to them and I sent them a picture of me in uniform and said, "Does anyone in your congregation remember this young cop who used to be a part of your congregation?" And they got back to me. It was very interesting. But this is, like I said, very powerful. I'm glad I didn't miss it, and can't thank you both more than I don't have the words to thank you as much as I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
So glad you were here. Yeah, I just, this is one of those conversations that the offshoots of this could be just endless, right? I mean, just generational trauma and everybody else's angle of that. So, yeah, thank you so much for starting this conversation. And Sabine, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I want to add something. This is very important. You have to distinguish the different units in the Nazi Reich. When we talk about the Wehrmacht, these were the normal soldiers, and the soldiers were like all soldiers in other countries. They fought. And then we have the racial theorists. These are not soldiers. These are men like Heinrich Himmler. And David, you had it on the front slide. Heinrich Himmler was the chief of the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, and he was the chief of the racial theory. And he was one of the most evil people because he was the one who thought about the final solution, because he says these killing squads, what Rich says, it is dehuman for the shooters, not for the victims. And Himmler said we must find another method to kill them more effectively. And this person saw this only as a logistical and organizational problem, and not he has no empathy for the people he talks about. And this is very important to say. They are not all equal. And my grandfather was part of the Wehrmacht. This is why I could go with that. But the daughter of Heinrich Himmler, for example, is a fanatical Nazi during this time too. Dan has tried to interview her, but she denied. She said, "No, you're Jewish. I can't talk to you." And she's involved in the far right scene here in Germany. And she was also involved in supporting war criminals in South America. And I think this is what we have to know. This is a very important thing. They were not all equal, and we have the absolute fanatical racial politicians, and they made this ideology and they bring it into power and they support it. And there were also some from the eastern territories. They want to make their properties bigger, and they support Hitler as well. And for example, the grandfather of one of the member of the AfD party, Beatrix von Storch, was one of these persons. And you see that there are different kinds of persons in the Nazi area, and there are different aims. But the ordinary man, I think my grandfather was nothing special. He was an ordinary soldier. He was not an ideologist, and I think that is really, really important to say when we want to understand what's up with the Nazi regime.
Yeah, very powerful, Sabine. Thank you so much for sharing. I can't believe it's already half past the hour. So I just want to wrap it up with Miriam. And does anybody else have any last thoughts after we hear? Okay, Rand, I was thinking that you would be a good voice too. So Miriam, let's go to you. Welcome, Miriam. We didn't get to meet you at the beginning, but
Yes.
it's so good to see a new face. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Miriam. I'm a friend of Sabine. And I just want to thank you for sharing your stories, Sabine and David. And I'd like to add something. The anti-Semitism and all the other things like ableism and um, women hating and things like that didn't just disappear after Nazi Germany. Um, but I think there are two, yeah, points that are highly underestimated. It's like education and how things were, yeah, socially encouraged or accepted. And I think yeah, this is like in school in Nazi Germany, they teached race theory and horrible things like that. And this has a huge impact on people and also what society accepts or encourages. And I think this is what changed in Germany. It was like in school, you have like a few times Nazi Germany as a topic, and we talked at school about how did it happen, what can we do that this will not happen again. And now we see in the world it can happen again, and it will happen again. And I think, yeah, education is a big theme, and yeah, how politics play into it when society accepts. Yeah, dehumanizing others and all this stuff. And yeah, I just wanted to add after World War II, anti-Semitism didn't disappear. It was like processes happened, and in Germany, there's still anti-Semitism, but not in the way it was in Nazi Germany. And yeah, education and societal changes did that. And this is nothing which stays the same. We always have to, yeah, fight for this to process and that it didn't change back. Yeah.
I think what we're doing right now is like one of the very best ways to educate. Don't you think? To hear the stories, like these are from real human beings, and this is what happened, and this is how we can reframe it. This is how we can never forget. And, with the amazing compassion that's been on this group too, in this conversation, really trying to understand like what happened and then hearing kind of, different angles. My hope is that we can keep having something that's just not just a textbook reading, but like really have these conversations of real storytelling. But I'm so glad that you're here, Miriam. Thanks so much for coming and thanks for sharing too. It's good to have you. Good to have a new face. So why don't we end with Rand, and then I just want to circle back to David and Sabine to see if they have any last thoughts that they want us to walk away with. But Rand, I'm so glad you were on today because I can imagine you have a lot of thoughts.
Well, I don't have a lot and I don't have a lot of time, but David and Sabine, that was just absolutely spellbinding, and I really appreciate your putting yourselves out there that way. I want there's a Holocaust museum in Washington, D.C., and I happened to be down there. I'm going to say it was like 25 or 30 years ago when it opened, and I had my kids with me, and I was very anxious about taking them. But I was so happy afterwards that I did it because it was absolutely astonishing what I learned. And they had all these exhibits, but they had walls up so the adults could look over and see what was there before deciding whether or not they wanted to expose their children to it. But it was just astonishing. I thought it was going to be ultra depressing, and it was to some extent, but it was also just so amazing in the way the history and all of it. So I just wanted to point that out because I assume it's still there. Who knows the culture today, but if you get a chance to go there, it puts a whole different light on it. And again, thank you for sharing. And I have to go. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Rand, for
Yeah.
bringing up the museum. It is still there. It is definitely one of the most visited museums in DC. You need to get tickets well ahead of time before you want to go because it's impossible to get into, it's like a good problem to have, I guess. I don't know. And you can't do it all at once. It is so emotional that it's really difficult to walk through the whole thing, and it's huge. And then the shoes and the hair at the end are pretty disturbing. But the what I would say about museums is there's also a great one in Cincinnati. And if anybody that's looking to do a Holocaust museum in Cincinnati and actually feel good on the way out, I know that sounds like a oxymoron, but the whole museum is done through the lens of being an upstander. So where most Holocaust museums look at the victim side, this museum in Cincinnati talks about those that stood up for the Jews and how they became upstanders and created a better society from the the horribleness that they were confronted with. And at the end of the museum, it actually gives you an opportunity to enter into the computer what you are going to do to be an upstander. And then it puts it up on this big board on the exit of the museum, kind of gives you a little bit of accountability that you need to now go and do that. So it's a really special place. So I'm glad he talked about the museum because I should have brought that up earlier.
I love that. That is like really giving a great direction
Mhm.
to like if this ever, let's never forget, first off, and if this ever happens, what can we do? Like
Mhm.
really putting it right there. Love it. Thank you so much, David. Sabine, do you have any thoughts?
Um, hmm, no, just a few things. One, I must think about. Dan said once, if you take a sample from about 100 persons, and the political circumstances change, there will be 5% that will be rescuers, and 20% perpetrators, and the rest will be bystanders on different levels. And this was very, very interesting for me because we should be aware of ourselves. How would we change when the political circumstances change? We cannot foresee that, what happened within us. And I think this is for me the most important experience.
Yeah, thank you so much
Beautiful
for
takeaway.
yes, thank you so much. Yes, we must not be bystanders. That's what I get. We must not do that. Prepare our minds and our hearts to take action whenever we get confronted with that. Scott, gotta let you end out here.
Thank you there, Sarah. And I meant to mention this when I was on the road and forgot. If you guys haven't watched the movie The Book Thief,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
highly recommend that you do. Now, it is a movie of fiction. There's a book, but it's about a little girl and her brother, and they are orphans, and they are taken in by an older German couple. And the movie is from the little girl's perspective. It is amazing. And as a dad of daughters, I just wanted to lift that poor girl out of that movie and just hold her in my arms. and love her. It is such an amazing movie. I think everyone that's on this call today, if you haven't seen it, please, over this weekend, if you have a minute, just, I'm sure it's on Netflix, but it's called The Book Thief. There's that the story covers so many things of what we're talking about here today. So, thanks.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Scott. Well, there are not enough words to thank you, David and Sabine. I mean, to me, I just would love to see this happen so much. Exactly what happened here today. Thank you so much, the rest of you, for being on and to adding so much to the conversation. I think there's so many more conversations that we can have around this theme. To really release stories from other people who have experienced generational trauma in other wars and so many things, race. I mean, there's so many things we can talk about, but just a huge thank you, David and Sabine. And I hope this opens more doors for both of you actually together to share and talk more. Much love to you all. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having us.